The Chicago Blackhawks, change has come during this offseason. A new coach, some new players, and maybe a changing of the guard. Jack Bushman of Locked On Blackhawks is here to talk about that and more on today's Locked On NHL podcast.
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome, everybody, to the Monday edition of the Locked On NHL podcast. Gil Martin, so glad you could join us today. And thank you for making Locked On NHL your first listen every day. We are free and available on all platforms. Today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline, where the game starts. My pleasure to welcome back to the show the host of Locked On Blackhawks, Jack Bushman. And Jack, good to have you back. And a lot of changes this year during the offseason for the Blackhawks. Let's start at the top. A new coach. Are you happy with the hiring? And what do you think it'll mean for this team going forward?
Yeah, one of the few moves that the Blackhawks had this summer that I was happy about was bringing on Luke Richardson to be their new head coach, former assistant coach with the Montreal Canadiens. And everything I've heard about Luke Richardson from former players or former staff members that worked with him, whatever it be, everyone says Luke Richardson is an amazing coach, but also an amazing human being who can connect with players on a very, close level. He's a former player himself, played over 1,000 games in the NHL, knows what it's like to be a player. Everything I've heard about Luke Richardson has been really positive. So I'm really excited for him to kind of take over. I think one big thing in particular about him as well is he does have some experience with coaching young players and coaching at the AHL level. And that's really the focal point for the Blackhawks these next handful of years, right? Is developing their young talent and hoping that a few years down the road, they'll be able to pull it all together and create a Stanley Cup contender once again. But in order to do that, they have to successfully develop these players and bring them on the right way. And I think Luke Richardson is a really good person to do that. Very familiar with that side of things, understands how important that process is. And I think that was really a big reason why the Blackhawks decided to make him their head coach, was because of what he's going to be able to do for the young players who are coming through, making the jump to the NHL level in the next couple of seasons, and help them be part of this process. And Luke understands that it's going to be a process too, right? There's no secrets here. This is obviously by the moves the Blackhawks have made this summer. It's a scorched earth rebuild. And I'm sure Luke Richardson isn't, thrilled about some of the moves that they made, trading Alex DeBrincat and Kirby Dach, letting Dylan Strome and Dominic Kubalik walk for nothing. His roster is going to be fairly thin. He's not going to have a ton to work with, but he's a competitive guy, a fierce guy. He wants to win every day. And, the saying is organizations tank, but coaches and players don't tank. And Luke Richardson, again, he knows the situation he's in, but he's not just going to mail it in. He's going to have these guys wanting to compete night in and night out. And I think that's very big, especially for the young guys who, like I've said, 3 to 4 years down the road, this is going to be crucial experience for them, going and getting these opportunities, but not taking anything for granted, still competing hard each and every night. And then the hope is that when this team and the roster gets a little bit stronger, those guys will already have that experience. They'll be coached up well. And then they'll be able to make an impact one day for this franchise. So I was really happy about the hiring of Luke Richardson. Only good things I've heard all across the board. And another thing, too, is he's apparently going to be – not apparently, he actually confirmed already that he is going to be going back to his zone defense next year, which I think is really key for the Blackhawks, because previously under Jeremy Colleton and even after he got fired when Derek King was the interim coach, the Blackhawks ran mostly a man-to-man defense, and it caused a lot of confusion in the defensive zone, a lot of breakdowns and miscommunications. Guys would be wide open in the slot, uncovered. things of that sort. And it cost this team for far too long. It's really been a key issue the past 3 to 4 years. I think a lot of Blackhawks fans would feel that way. And to hear Luke Richardson is going to be switching things up in the defensive zone, I think that's really a breath of fresh air for a lot of Blackhawks fans as well. So, yeah, on all fronts, I'm very excited for the Luke Richardson era to start here in Chicago. I know it's going to be a difficult task for him these first few years, but I think the Blackhawks do have the right mentality and mindset and also experience for behind the bench, both as a player and as a coach. I think Luke Richardson provides great insight and can connect, like I said, to players on a personal level. I've heard he's really good at one-on-one chats and not trying to play games with guys, just trying to get the best out of them. And he knows every player is different too. You got to build relationships with these guys. So I've really enjoyed hearing all the things that I have so far about Luke Richardson. And yeah, I'm super excited for him to get started.
You talked a little bit about some of the guys who the team traded away or lost in free agency. How about some of the new players they've brought on this offseason?
Yeah, the two big ones we'll say were Max Domi and Andreas Athanasiou. Both got 1 year, $3 million contracts for the Blackhawks. But in all likelihood, the situation the team is in, those two players are both probably going to be dealt at the deadline on expiring contracts. The Blackhawks will also have the ability to retain if that's necessary. And I think Athanasiou and Domi were two wise pickups by the Blackhawks, right? First, for Athanasiou, we know he has the speed. He's one of the fastest players in the entire NHL, former 30-goal scorer with the Detroit Red Wings. He's kind of had some consistency issues the past couple of years. Wasn't on the ice very much last season for the Los Angeles Kings, but everywhere he's been, seems like fans and people around all those teams have said, you'll see flashes of what Andreas Athanasiou can do for a team. It just hasn't, really been put all together since he potted 30 goals 3 or 4 seasons ago now. So, but the speed factor, I think, is something that's always going to be enticing for another club, right? With the NHL always getting faster and faster. Like Andreas Athanasiou, I think, will be an enticing pickup for another team at the deadline potentially. And same for Domi, but in kind of a different way because he plays that scrappy game, right? We saw him have a big showing for the Carolina Hurricanes in their playoff run, can play up and down the lineup. I think that will also be valuable to teams who are trying to, make a push for the Stanley Cup playoffs, to add a guy like that who can play, maybe on your third and fourth line, can provide you some offense, but is really good at getting under players' skin and being annoying and kind of filling that goon role that, it has been kind of washed out of the NHL in terms of fighting, but you still need those players, those agitators and those scrappy guys to get the job done. So for the Blackhawks, I think it was smart to sign both of these players to 1 year deals, very movable deals. And that's probably really going to be the name of the game for those two. I don't, if Alex DeBrincat's getting traded, I don't see the Blackhawks keeping an older Andreas Athanasiou or an older Max Domi as part of their future plan. So I would say 95% chance those two are getting dealt. But it will be interesting to see how they kind of fit into the Blackhawks lineup this season, because with all the players that have departed, both of those two are very likely to get top 6 opportunities here in Chicago, which could also, help sweeten the pot a little bit for their return possibly down the road. So those were really the only main additions that the Blackhawks made. They also added Alex Stalock as a backup goaltender, and then Colin Blackwell was an interesting signing from Seattle as well, someone who can play in the bottom 6 to provide a little bit of offense. And every time I saw him, every time the Blackhawks played the Kraken this year, his energy and his hustle was something that really stood out to me. So again, another guy that the Blackhawks will probably be looking at moving come March and trade deadline time. But I think that's the smart way to go about it right now. If they were adding any players via free agency this year, it was probably to do just that, to flip them at the deadline and hope to acquire more assets in the future.
You talked a little bit about Lou Richardson's ability to coach up younger players and help their development. But there are two veterans who have been with the Blackhawks for a long time, in Jonathan Toews and Patrick Kane. Toews has already said he's not necessarily thrilled with the idea of a rebuild. What does the future hold for these two all-time great Blackhawks? Will they be on the roster by the time the season is over?
Probably not, Gil. If I had to guess, I would say probably not. And sad to say, but all signs are pointing in that direction at this point. I mean, first for Toews, not only did he make that comment recently, which I do think was blown a little bit out of proportion, but that's how the media goes, but it's not the first comment that he's made where mostly he just hasn't committed to the Blackhawks. And as the longtime captain of this team, right, grown up in Chicago his whole adult life, obviously has had all the success here. It's odd for, a longtime captain to not come out and say he wants to still be part of this team moving forward. So he's beat around the bush a little bit, but I think everyone deep down knows that Jonathan Toews isn't on board for what the Blackhawks are pitching to him right now. And it seems like his days for sure are numbered, more so than Patrick Kane's. But at the same time, for Kane, they've traded everyone he enjoys playing with, and not just this year. This has been a thing that the Blackhawks have done a lot in the past. Nick Schmaltz, gone. Artemi Panarin, gone. Alex DeBrincat, gone. Kirby Dach's gone as well. Dylan Strome's gone. Dylan Strome and DeBrincat was who Patrick Kane played for basically the entire second half of the season, and they're both gone now. So, I mean, while he has been here and there are fans arguing, he cares about the franchise records and staying in the city of Chicago. Yeah, I hear that. But at the end of the day, Patrick Kane has shown no signs of slowing down. If anything, he's gotten better. He just had his third most productive points season in his entire career. He's been incredible since he's turned 30 years old and has shown no signs of slowing down. Why would he want to waste years of that when he's already wasted 3 or 4 at this point? And they've traded everyone who he likes playing with. And we even heard him say in his end of the season press conference, if Alex DeBrincat is here, it's going to make it a lot easier for me to sign on throughout this rebuilding process. Well, DeBrincat got shipped to Ottawa, so I feel like Patrick Kane has to be upset with the moves that the Blackhawks have made at this point, and it just feels like it's going to be the end of the road for him at some point this year. Now, it doesn't feel like anything's going to happen this offseason, but I do think both the players and the Blackhawks are in a good spot to kind of have a little farewell tour. Let Patrick Kane and Jonathan Toews kind of have their final goodbye with Chicago in the first half of the season. It's also a good way for the team to incentivize fans to still come to the games, even though it's probably going to be a nightmare, right? Come see Jonathan Toews and Patrick Kane one last time as members of the Chicago Blackhawks. They're not going to openly say that, but I think it just fits really well, right? So if I had to guess, Gil, I would say that Patrick Kane and Jonathan Toews both are not members of the Chicago Blackhawks come trade deadline day in 2023.
All right, Jack, why don't you tell our viewers and our listeners where they could find the podcast and where they could find you on social media?
Yeah, absolutely. If you want to check out and keep up with all Blackhawks news this offseason, you can find Locked On Blackhawks wherever you get your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Odyssey, all that good stuff. It's 100% for free. If you want to check it out on Twitter, you can check it out at @L_O_Blackhawks. And then for me personally, you can find me at Jack Bushman too on Twitter, where I'll be tweeting, not as much NHL stuff as we're kind of in the dead point of the offseason now, Gil, but golf is about to pick up for any listeners out there who are intrigued by golf. And then, of course, football season is right around the corner, and I love football as much as anyone. So you can find a bunch of good sports stuff at Jack Bushman too on Twitter if you want to check me out.
All right, Jack, thanks for joining us today. Always a pleasure to have you.
Absolutely, Gil. Always fun talking with you.
Today's episode is brought to you by Built Bar. If you haven't tried Built Bar Puffs yet, you are depriving yourself of one of life's great joys. And guess what? There's a new flavor. Ready? Delicious, indulgent cookie dough covered in chocolate. That's right. Built has done it again. Let me introduce you to your new favorite. It's cookie dough chunk puffs. They have a light, chewy texture, real cookie dough chunks, and of course, like all Built Bars, they are covered in 100% real chocolate. It has all the joys of eating cookie dough without the hassle of making it, plus it's healthy for you. Cookie dough chunk puffs have only 160 calories, but pack a whopping 15 grams of protein. And look, you can run to Built.com right now, snag a box for you and the family. It's the perfect treat, or you could find a really good hiding place and just hoard them for yourself. And what's great about Built is that all bars are made with collagen protein, which your body absorbs more efficiently and provides tons of health benefits. eat something that tastes good and is good for you. Go to Built.com right now. Use promo code LOCK15. You'll get 15% off your order. That's promo code LOCK15 for 15% off at Built.com.